Hello all, and welcome to the Fantasy and Sci-Fi Fanatics podcast. I'm your host Daniel Coolbaugh. Today I have me a very special guest, Adrian M. Gibson. Adrian, how are you doing today?
Doing very well, buddy. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I was about to sneeze there, but I was able to catch myself. So
You held it in.
yeah. Exactly. I just have to plug real quick. If you guys have not seen Adrian, MJ, and I in our cross episodes for SFF Addicts, just make sure you guys go and take a look at that. Excuse me. And we were able to talk to Andy Peloquin and talk about a masterclass, right, Adrian? Like he was just
He
spitting
was killing it.
knowledge.
Yeah, if anyone
I
wants to
forgot to
know
talk.
like a
Yeah.
deep 101 on self-publishing and getting started there, Andy just absolutely nailed it.
Somebody messaged me like during, they're like, you're not saying anything. I kept forgetting because I was taking notes, and I felt like he was just saying, he was just like literally just saying so many great things. And I feel like particularly when he was talking about chapter one, and his first chapter, for Dark Blade was just absolutely amazing. And then I was like, yeah, this is definitely my kind of book, my kind of author, my kind of series. So I felt like that was just like amazing that I was thinking about that previously and he started talking about it. So I thought that was really awesome. But yeah. Which actually really leads me to really like into your book, because like I said, I started Mushroom Blues late last night after I finished another book. You sent me the sample chapters, and I gotta say, talk about that first scene. Like, I absolutely just love your first scene, and I was hoping that you could maybe just talk to our audience just a little bit about how you set up that first scene and kind of what it was about, if it's not too spoilery, if that makes sense. But
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the chapter is available. If anyone wants to read it, you can go
oh,
check it out
perfect.
on Before We Go blog. So it's out there. If you don't want spoilers, just like go read it first and then come back.
That's
Do you want
fair.
me to give people a bit of a pitch of Mushroom Blues
Yeah,
first
yeah, yeah.
before
Go
I
right
dive into the
ahead.
first
Yeah, go
chapter?
right ahead.
Cool. So Mushroom Blues is the first book in the Hoffman Report series, and the first book in the Fungalverse shared universe, which is a sort of like an interconnected universe that I created based around this secondary world inhabited by both humans, but also mushroom-headed fungal people. And Mushroom Blues in particular, it's Henrietta Hoffman. She's a detective, homicide detective, and she's investigating the mysterious murder and disappearances of fungal and half-breed children, in which case she has to begrudgingly team up with Koji Nameko, who's a mushroom-headed beat cop, and the two basically go around the city of Neo Kanoko investigating different leads, interviewing people, and a lot of really sort of fundamentals in terms of mystery genre and police procedural, but blending that in with crazy fungi and wild architecture and all kinds of things, and a lot of body horror as well. So if you get grossed out easily, I'm sorry. This book is not is not tame on that front. Speaking of which, the first scene and the first chapter
Yeah.
opens up on a beach with Henrietta discovering this bag with the dismembered body of a child, and this thrusts her into this investigation, which completely overwhelms her in terms of her mycophobia. She's very averse to mushrooms and fungi, in which case her being in Neo Kanoko is its own sort of hell for her. And there's some backstory as to why she came to Neo Kanoko in the first place, and that's part of her sort of side story. And the first scene is her investigating this body, figuring out like what's going on, looking at the clues around. It's very much rooted in the traditions of murder mysteries and detectives and how they survey the scene and analyze things and stuff like that. But she also has a pretty disgusting, terrifying moment involving spores and mycelium, and I won't go any further than that. But for me, it was really important to use this first chapter, this first scene, to establish the mood as well as Henrietta as a character and how she perceives the world, but also Neo Kanoko and the sort of fungal nature of this world in which she inhabits.
So there's just so many things when I was reading like the first chapter. First of all, I have to say for Adrian, you were saying, like if you love mystery noir, just like the detective trope, I felt like you nailed like right off the bat. There were just so many things where I was just like, I felt like from when you had first approached me about the book and pitched it. I just felt like that first chapter, particularly, I would say like the first 8 pages, like really fulfilled all of my expectations for what the book was going to be about, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like ding, 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 like right in a row, which I thought was really good. And it wasn't like, it was really natural too, which was really awesome. You know, some people, they're trying to kind of, you know, throw like, this is what it's going to be about, and just kind of throw stuff together, and it doesn't really flow, but yours flowed really,
Mm-hmm.
really well. So like Adrian said, check out that first chapter. I am actually allergic to mold, amoxicillin,
I feel like
penicillin, like
I will say most people are allergic to mold in some capacity or
right?
another.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you have to
Um,
be. Yeah, 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 yeah.
that's
I
just
learned
the
that
immune
recently.
system. That's the immune system being like, hey, this shit's not good for you to breathe in.
Yeah.
Which
Yep,
is a
yep, yep.
really bad case for most modern homes, which tend to have some kind of mold in it. But in the context of this world, it actually is like something that is brought up is the idea of like infection and customs that many people around the world were forced into during the pandemic in terms of like
Mm,
masks and cleanliness. And you know, her approach to crime scenes also involves these sort of neuroses around things like spores infecting her, or the very air that she's breathing, her being unsure of her existence in this place, whether or not it's causing her to slowly become colonized, or you know, like people who have persistent coughs and thinking like, is that an allergy or is it something more insidious?
yeah, yeah. No, totally. Yeah. Yeah. As soon as that first scene started, I was just like, I got kind of itchy myself. I was like, I need to go get a Benadryl or something. So I could, but it's funny because like I could totally, you know, I could totally relate to that. They're trying to talk to me recently. They're like, you're not allergic. I'm like, so I have a much worse reaction to those things than other people. So I was like, I don't know what else you'd call that,
Right.
but I was just like, either way, I don't like it. So as soon as you know, she was really getting into that whole aspect, and kind of like really like her fears, I would say, about being infected or the spores. I was just like,
Mm-hmm.
man, I feel you, sister. I was just like connected with the character right away, just from like kind of like that aspect, from like health
Right
wise. I was
on.
like, I get it. And I was like kind of thinking like I would not be able to survive here. Like you said, like if I just start coughing, I would just assume like, you know, like there was something wrong with me. So I would
Mm-hmm.
be displaying some Sheldon like tendencies very, very
Just like
quickly. I
just dousing your hands in alcohol
Yeah,
all the
yeah, yeah.
time and
Yep, 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 yep.
alcohol
I'd be wearing
gel, or
the
like,
mask all the time.
yeah,
Yep.
exactly. Yeah.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads me right into really the next question. I'm curious, like, what made you decide to write your own book, and then really to write this type of book? Because I feel like it is a pretty big endeavor for a first time author, to combine these different genres. Like I said, I felt like you did it really well. But I don't know. Like for me, I'm like, oh, maybe I'll just do this novella, or maybe I'll just do a regular fantasy, or, whatever you want to call it. Cozy fantasy. I don't know, whatever you want to say. But for you, I feel like you like really went like a blacksmith and were like, I'm going to layer this, I'm going to layer this, and it's going to be this very unique product. So I'm just curious as to, why you decided, Mushroom Blues was going to be that first book that you were going to put out to the world.
I mean, I never really thought about it in any way that to me seemed like atypical
Mm.
or or difficult in terms of the approach. This isn't the first book that I've written. It's not the
Yeah,
first
yeah.
book that I've written in the fungal verse. But the way that this series sort of started out, it was like, started with a dream of like a giant mushroom in a forest, started with all of my experiences with psychedelics in my 20s, and just kind of felt like a natural evolution of these things that had become sort of like normalized in my life. And so what it started out was kind of like a travelogue, with an unnamed POV, kind of exploring this mushroom kingdom. It was much more like fantasy oriented,
Oh, cool.
but looking at ways in which fungi and mycelium could be used to better humanity through the lens of this person experiencing a mushroom world with all these fungal people living their lives and the way that they're like connected and the community orientation and the way that their architecture is much more based in nature and fungi and those kinds of things. But I realized after so much research, after doing a ton of illustration, because I'm a very visual person as an illustrator, and so I drew a lot of the stuff in this world, whether it be like the mushroom people or architecture and different things like that. But I quickly realized it would be very difficult for me to make that story subtle enough where it didn't come across as
Mm.
preachy.
Oh,
And
gotcha.
I hate preachy things. Like I just think
Yeah.
that that dilutes the message of that particular thing and ultimately counteracts the potential that it has to affect somebody or affect broader change. And so
Yeah.
I thought, like, what are some genres that I really like? I love cyberpunk. I love mystery. I love police procedurals and all these different kinds of uh, just like gritty genres, and combine that with the foundations that were very strong in terms of mushroom people and mycelium and the ways in which their society was organized. And so it's just very natural for me to bring in different genres and blend them with that foundation that I had laid out. And then, you know, explore it with the first book that I wrote, which I haven't entirely scrapped. It was a very, very big learning curve for me,
Oh, yeah.
but it was helpful in the sense that it it gave me constant lessons through trial and error. And I
Mm.
use those, and I'm gonna rewrite that book. It's gonna be the next one that comes out after Mushroom Blues.
Oh, cool.
But Mushroom Blues was the one that started out as like an idea for uh, what Ryan Cahill would say is like a newsletter freebie kind of thing, where you give a story away when someone signs up for your newsletter. It was going to be a novella, but I realized there was so much meat there that I could expand it into a book, into a full novel, but also expand it even further into a 4-book series. And it was just perfect for me in the sense that Henrietta is the kind of person where her circumstances and her personality are kind of clashing with the environment that she's in. She's mycophobic and grossed out by this stuff, but she's also newly arrived in Neo Kanoko and also having to deal with the circumstances of sort of like a sexist police force and fungal people who hate humans and a military occupation force and all these different elements that I felt would be a good introduction to this world so that people can kind of get acclimatized to it and awaken to what is happening through the lens of Henrietta.
This is really cool. I just was curious because I talked to a lot of different authors, particularly, like newer authors and writers, and, they're asking me, they're like, well, I really have this idea. I actually have a friend who, she was saying like, she's not a big cyberpunk reader or, sci-fi reader, like Altered Carbon or anything like that. But she had a very particular idea around a theme, and she's like, I just can't get this out of my head. So I gave her different movies to look at. I gave her different books to read and stuff. But she goes, I don't even know if there's a market for it. I'm like, to me, it just sounds like a mix of like Altered Carbon, Terminator, iRobot, like just, and kind of the Matrix a little bit. I mean, it just sounded astounding to me, to be quite honest.
Yeah,
And I told her, I was like, she's written some other books, but I'm like, I really think you should go with this idea. And I keep forgetting, I have to go check back. It's been about 6 months, I would say. And I gave her some authors to talk to and stuff. But, I try to encourage her. I'm like, this sounds like a
yeah,
really cool idea, and I think it, if it's something where, you can, like something you want to write and something you're interested in, and you said like, I just want to keep pointing this out to people because I keep getting this question asked. So, you were interested in, police procedurals and, all these other things. I love the cyberpunk as well. So I like seeing those themes in there, and I love mystery. So I just love seeing how you've combined these different genres into this really unique thing, that I think is going to make a great product for you, particularly as a series. I like reading new things. I like seeing how, as a writer, like you have done different things in these first few chapters, it makes me really think, oh man, I could really blend some different things together. Richard Lee
Yeah.
Byers has been doing this for years, fantasy, horror, a little bit of sci-fi, and just come up with just great stuff. So I just want to point out to our audience, if you're an author, again, please take a look at Mushroom Blues, in those sample chapters, and really take a look and talk about a masterclass, of combining different elements and genres. And I think a lot more people need to do that, because we're going to get more unique books like Mushroom Blues out of it. So I don't know. I applaud you for, for just going with,
Thanks, man.
what you want to write. And, I think some people that I have talked to, just to give you credit, because I've talked to them and they're like, oh, it's too hard of a book to write. They're like, I'm going to get to it later, and
right. But here's the thing. It's like,
no.
I feel like the indie space, the self-publishing space, really benefits from that kind of experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
Not only from the author perspective in terms of what you can play around with, but also the reader perspective, where they are more likely to be searching for things that are a bit more outside of the box.
Yeah.
And for me, with writing Mushroom Blues, I knew it was the right fit because I'd never clashed with those different elements combining together. Those were
Cool.
not the source of difficulty for writing this book. Like the source of difficulty for writing this book was more like mental hurdles in terms of sort of self-critique and imposter syndrome and those kinds of things. But the actual mix of genres didn't present a problem to me. And one of my friends actually said to me, like, in terms of the world building, and if you want to get super, super mushroomy about it, he described it as like microdose world building, which is the kind of thing that I think writers could be more aware of, in the sense that if you are blending so many genres together, dumping any aspect of it too heavily on your reader might be the kind of thing that is too jarring for them. And so if you're able to infuse those elements in a way where they're getting trickles of different genres and trickles of different elements, that's going to be more digestible for them. And also it's going to pull them deeper into the story, because they're not going to have that like, whoa, pull out moment where they have to pause and think like, what the hell just happened there? Where like the chassis of the book becomes like too obvious. But if you can provide that sort of microdose experience, then that is the kind of reading experience that will engross readers more and not hit them over the head with the fact that, like, Mushroom Blues, I tried to figure out like the best comps for it. And I was like, Blade Runner, because I love Blade Runner and it is so aesthetically inspirational to me. But then also like True Detective and District 9 in terms of its like sociopolitical commentary, but also like the weirdness of it. And then blending that with like Jeff Vandermeer and China Mieville and authors like Philip K. Dick. So to try and give people an idea of what they can expect, but also making it your own and not bombarding the reader too heavily with any particular aspect at one time.
Well, I think that's great. And I think you did a great job personally, because, I just was listening to your podcast, you and MJ. I was listening to some other people, and I got to like a new one recently, and I'm totally blanking on who it was, but somebody had suggested to me, so it's on Spotify. I have to go back and see what it was, but like the first intro, they're talking about world building for the one I was listening to, and right from the bat, one of the authors was like, and the host goes, well, I like to think of world building as like you're filling up a tub. And he's like, think of every reader, right? Like some people like it hot, some people like it cold, some people like it in between, but we all start by, just starting. And I just did this morning for my son, right? For his bath, I just started that faucet just a little bit, just till it got hot enough, right? And then once it got hot enough, then, I let it run a little bit, and then I, put the stopper in, and it slowly fills. And once he said that, I was just like, oh my God, I was like, that is a really good, I feel like, way to think about it. And so it's funny, because then as I was going through, chapter 1 and stuff, and then in chapter 2, I was like, oh, this actually, it like fit perfectly, honestly, because I felt like
it's
that's
like
what you did.
It's like the trickle effect, where it's like you're warming things up, And then by
Yep.
the end of the book, it's like you've already had your expectations laid out for you,
Yep.
and there will be surprises, but it's not going to be anything that completely ruins the experience for you because it's not
Yeah.
so far out of left field. It's going to be at the temperature. It's going to like slowly adjust to the temperature that you're going to become
Yep.
used to. And it's going to remain at that temperature with fluctuations of twists and surprises and whatnot. But it's not going to be like, oh yeah, 70% of the way through the book, it all of a sudden goes from hot to cold. And you're like,
Yeah.
what the fuck
Yeah.
is going on? You know?
Yeah. No, totally. Yeah, so I don't know, I just thought it was funny because I was listening to this week, and as soon as I was going through chapter one in particular, I was like, okay, cool. I was like, I could just tell it was definitely like my kind of thing. I think a couple people recently, like, I think we talked too before we got recording. I know I talked to Andy Peloquin about this too, like privately a couple of months ago or whatever, about, just like different flavors of books. And eventually you just get to know, chapter one, like, yeah, this is my kind of book or my kind of writing.
Right.
For me, like I said, I just finished Red Rising yesterday night. Last night, actually, yesterday, read most of the day. And I was like, oh, but at the start, I wasn't sure about that one. But I had talked to Andy and some other people. They're like, no, this is definitely going to be your thing. For me,
Mm-hmm.
that one took a little bit. But for you, for chapter one, for me, I was like, oh, this is definitely my kind of thing. Because I'm definitely interested in those same genres. And I'd love to see, I want to do something like that in fantasy, like similar to what you did, but in like a fantasy setting. Kind of have like a fantasy detective. I've had a couple people, like Thraxus is a great character. I'm totally blanking on the author, but he's basically like kind of does that thing in a fantasy setting. And to me, that's always interesting. I always
Yeah.
want to take like a fire elementalist and kind of do the same thing, and have him be like a whatever, like a fire marshal or a detective, and
Nice.
track mages down and set things on fire. I don't know, just something different. So for me, this was like my kind of unique. And I don't know, I felt the different genres in there, like you're saying that you tapped into that I really enjoy. But I just felt like, yeah, I felt like as a reader it was really enjoyable, but I felt like as an author, there was a lot of things that I could, see how you did with world building. Because I was just impressed with chapter one, just, like how you trickled three different genres and just blended it really solidly into one story. And it made me feel instantly connected to your character. And I was interested in the world. And, it really got me interested for the chapters coming up. So it was really
Thank you,
awesome.
man. Thank you. That is like the kind of praise that authors want to hear, because for a lot of people it's like cover will either attract you or push you
Hmm.
away. And then even if you get past that point, the first chapter is going to be
Yeah.
that big, that second impression that people get beyond the
Yeah.
cover.
Yeah.
And so it's like if you can sell someone on a cover and you can sell them on the first chapter, in all likelihood you've got a reader. and
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yep.
and so it's like, for me, that, thank you a lot. I really
Yeah. Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah.
that.
Well, and I know people tend to message me and they're like, "Were you saying that, or do you feel that?" I'm like, I have this problem where I'm really honest. So, like
That is
if I
not a
don't like a
problem.
book,
That is not a problem for me. I appreciate
well, if
honesty
I
more
don't
than
like a
anything.
book, I don't even DNF it. I'm just like, let it sit. I might come back to it later. I don't do bad reviews. I'm just like, it just wasn't for me. And I
Yeah,
usually just assume, it was like I got a bad recommendation. Now I tend to not get bad recommendations because I only listen to a certain group of people,
that's the
that
thing.
know
Yeah,
me and my tastes. Yeah.
you
So,
found the people who you share tastes
yep.
with that you
Yep.
can inherently trust their opinions about things. Like MJ and I
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
very similar reading tastes in a lot of ways, where she'll tell me like, I think you'll enjoy this book, and I'll pick it up and be like, yeah, this was fantastic. You know?
Talk about taste. Like every time I see her on TikTok where she's putting two books together, is like, if you like these two, you like this one. Like I'm just like,
She's very
save,
good at
save,
that.
save, save.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Or somebody will ask her, they'll be like, oh, they asked me about this and there's this. Like she's like the ultimate, like I worked in restaurants for a long time. So like I think like if you want to know a book that you would like that's similar to something, I feel like ask MJ, because she's like kind
She's
of like
like
a
a book
wine
sommelier.
connoisseur or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like here is this. Like you're like, yes, here's the tip or something. Like I wish I had that skill when it comes to books. I tried, I only know my group, but other people I tried. But I feel like she's that one person that I look to on social media where I'm like, yeah, if I'm looking for something, and blend it together, she'll be there with the recommendations. So
Yeah.
um But yeah, so super cool. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to, like I said, the rest of the chapters. I'm trying not to go too quick because I know we have a little bit of time, before Mushroom Blues is out. So I think I might kind of sample them until
Mm-hmm.
is the book releasing? You said March 9th, or
March
I might have
19th.
quite a few. March 19th. Okay. I was to say somebody else I was talking to was March 9th, that I'm interviewing either this week or next week. So I was like, I know I'm going to get that wrong. But yeah, March 19th can't come quick enough in my mind. Um, and you talked a little bit about like Mushroom Blues, in terms of like the book, but and like the main ideas, things like that. But I'm really curious, what was like the hardest part in terms of getting the novel written? And you talked a little bit about maybe some of those struggles, but can you talk specifically about what some of those were when you talked about like those mental hurdles?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the hardest part of this entire book process is like all of it stemmed from one of two sources. It was either the scene wasn't working
Hmm.
and my brain just wasn't connecting with it in a way that excited me, in which case I
Yeah.
knew I had to scrap this shit and figure out something else, because if it's not going to connect with me, it's not going to connect with whoever's reading it.
Yeah.
But the other part of it was just the difficulty in terms of sitting down and writing and doing the thing. It was those mental hurdles that my mind put in place to say, like, you can do this later, or something else has taken priority right now. And in particular, just because of where I live in Ecuador, and the country's been going through a bit of a tumultuous time right now. And so there's
Yeah. Yeah.
a lot of sort of pressure lingering in the back of my mind in terms of the political state of the country. Um, Different things like, if it goes really bad, making sure I have passports and everything ready for my kids, and if we have to just
Yeah.
pack leave at some point. And so it was like a lot of these struggles and emotions that got in the way more often than the actual story itself. I was my biggest impediment as opposed to the
Mm.
story. Once I got into it, you know, and sat my ass down and started writing, things flowed really well. I gave myself the leniency to not have to make things perfect every single time. I gave myself the leniency to write something crappy one day and the next day come back to it and rework it and move on in the story, as opposed to hanging myself up at every possible moment where I think like, oh, like I need to edit this before I move forward, or I need to write out this complete scene before I move forward. No, like I got to the point where if I wasn't in the place to write a chase scene or an action scene, I would just put like parentheses in bold and just be like, put action scene here. And just move your ass forward and get to the end of the story so that you can finish the first draft. Because going back and editing has made things so much easier, because I know all of this exists in my mind and I know the different pieces that are moving in order to make this story pan out, especially with a mystery, because mysteries have really core pieces to it that need to
Yeah.
make
Yeah.
sense. And if there are things that start to break the sort of structural foundations of those elements, in terms of like disassociating the reader from what is
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
on, and in turn disassociating the characters from like the reality of what's happening around them, that's when it starts to fall apart. And so it was very important for me to get through that first draft and understand like this is the definite endpoint that I want to go towards, because I love, like when I finished the first draft, I was like, I love the ending, and like teared up writing those last final chapters.
Oh, cool.
Um, and so for me, it's like going back and editing, I knew all of this is strong, but each time I go through and edit, I can add that nuance. I can strengthen every chapter as much as possible. I can hone in on like the tone and the character voice, but also like my writing style in a way that feels consistent. And that's all going to lessen the potential for reader disassociation.
I was gonna say, like, I feel like you and I are kind of in the same boat, you know, when you're talking about, you know, like that mystery crowd is definitely definitely one you want to hit each of those notes in particular fashion at particular times. Um and like that's why I said to my friends, like I want to get, you know, certain things with certain genres. And I said, you're trying to attract these readers. So I said, if you're not getting those things right, you know, I have a military sci-fi later on. I'm like, if I'm not getting X, Y, and Z right, I'm like, they're not gonna be happy, and that is going to spread very quickly to, you know, the crowd that you're trying to attract. So I definitely understand you there for particularly for mystery. And you know, it's just, again, doesn't necessarily have to, you know, do anything with, you know, that crowd or that genre, other than the fact, you know, from the writing aspect, right, that you have to hit certain points at certain times,
Mm-hmm.
you know, really to fit that genre. Yeah, so I think that makes total sense. It also makes total sense that you're saying that you're your own worst enemy, because I think every writer feels that way. And for the audience, before Adrian and I started recording, he's like, "How are you today?" And I had just come off of my horrible editing session where I was like, "Why did I do this to myself?" So I
Yeah.
actually, Adrian, I'm gonna do what I called the Dirk Ashton method, which you just talked about, which is just do the parentheses, and instead of trying to force it one day, just be like, "Okay, come back to this," because that's
Yeah.
like what I'm worrying about right now, is like trying to sift through that garbage to try and find, you know, something to recycle, I guess.
Right.
So I wish
But
I
if you're
had
gonna
done that.
if you're gonna do it, come up with a system. So it's like
Yeah, yeah,
I
totally.
can't
Yep,
remember what like the parentheses are called, but it's like you can do the ones that have like little like curly point. You can
oh yeah,
do
yeah, yeah, yep,
like block parentheses or just different methods so that you can literally go Command F, and
yep,
this is something that will never appear in any other part of my manuscript. And you can just go boom,
yeah,
boom, boom,
yeah,
boom, boom, and figure out like here are the different places where I need to insert something or fix something. And it makes sense that Dirk has that method too. I've never talked to him about it, so I didn't know that's how he did it. But he comes from a film background, and I feel
yep,
like
yep, yep,
that is very applicable to script writing
yeah,
in
yeah,
terms of the the details that are necessary in a script versus the details that are extraneous. And most directors and most actors would say like this shit shouldn't be in here. And so as an author, it's kind of like you just have a lot more you have to work with. And so you
yeah,
have to be very clear with yourself. This is something that I cannot handle right now, like mentally and creatively. But if it's a necessary part of that scene, just toss a note for yourself in there, have a system figured out, throw it in there and come back to it later. Because otherwise, you're just going to get bogged down and you're going to prevent yourself from doing the thing, because writer's block is not necessarily like it's not necessarily this like evil thing that I think a broader perception of writer's block is. It's
yeah, yeah,
literally your brain space doesn't have the time or the capacity to handle this thing right now, but that
yep,
doesn't mean you should stop writing. You know, it's just like recalibrate and find a different angle and move forward with the chapter, or write a completely different chapter or a completely different scene and come back
yeah,
to
yeah.
it, because nobody says you have to write this in order. Nobody says you have to finish this before you continue. You are the only person who's putting that block on yourself. So
No, totally. I think people forget the brain also is a muscle, and sometimes, you know, you really need time to recuperate. I have tried a few
just
different ways. I tend to
get a
find,
good night's sleep,
yeah,
man. Like something.
yeah, yeah.
You know.
I tend to that night, if I'm like, I'm just trying to write something just to feel like I, you know, accomplished something, I'll tend to take, sometimes I'll take like a day to three, but I'll just pick up something else. You know, that's not really very, you know, like I'll much pick up something that I'm working on an outline for, or maybe I'll just write something, you know, just a few chapters or something, or just
Mm-hmm.
any words just to get something. If I tend to find, if I don't write something in a day, then it like leads to 3 to 4 to 15. So I just write something and then I feel accomplished. I'm like, well, I got this push forward, even if it's an inch. And then
Yep.
usually like now yeah, even if it's not the next day, it's within 3 days. I'm like, oh, okay. And I
Yeah,
gave myself a break. I go back. I kind of look at it like, like the gym or, running or something like that. Sometimes I just can't cut that workout. I have to,
exactly.
I'm still going to do something, but I might come back to that later, that machine or
Yeah.
exercise. So I think if you
Like
look
my
at it
like
that way, but yeah.
yeah, like my trick is even if I'm not specifically like writing in my Word document and adding to the story, I'll always be adding notes and thoughts on my
Mm.
phone throughout the
Yeah, yeah.
day. Even if
Yep.
it's like a really good line of dialogue or an idea for how a scene could change, my mind is still thinking about the story. And so it's like if I take a break from thinking about the story, that's a problem for me.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
if I don't write for a day, that's totally fine because I'm also used to um using like project uh sort of like project tasks that are
Mm.
still related to the book
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
as a way of still being engaged and still taking care of something that I need to do. And so
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
like if one day I write and the next day I don't, but on that second day I do something related to the book, whether it's you know, do some like create a promo trailer or email people that I need to get in
Yeah,
touch with
yeah.
about a certain thing, and just kind of like taking care of some of those tasks that can pile up in the background, especially as a self-pub author, where you have to be more entrepreneurial about your approach and you have to manage certain tasks. And for me, it's like if I got that task done, then it was kind of like a little nudge forward to say like this project is still happening and you
Yeah,
can
yeah.
do this. And even if you're not writing, you're still doing something adjacent to the project itself, and that's still very important in the long run.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think I always tell my classes, my students, I'm like, are you doing something to push yourself or this group forward? And that's really just been our main focus. And I really, I like how you said that earlier too. That's where, for me, I'm like, that's just what I've adapted since my son's been born. I'm like, if it's 15 minutes in a day, I mean, I'm always doing something with podcasting or doing something or covers or what, I don't know, whatever, or outlines or something. But yeah, I agree. Like, as long as I've written or edited something within 15 minutes, it's going to push me forward in some way. I feel like it's been a successful day. Obviously, I want to do more, but some days you're just burnt out, tapped out. You're just dad tired. And,
Yeah,
15,
exactly.
20 minutes, in between those naps, maybe that's all you get. But at least you did something. But I think people always think monumental leaps, like I'm going to do this whole thing now and this whole thing now. And it's like, that's just not
Mm.
how mountains are crossed, right? Like it might take you a while. So it's
No, it's
okay
like
to
you have to
stop and
think
rest.
about you have to think about a book as like uh, a savings account where you you put in like a base amount of
Yeah. Yeah.
creative money, and that's kind of like your all the money that you've saved up in your mind over the course of a lifetime until the point where you decide I'm going to actually dedicate myself to doing this thing. That's kind of like the savings that you've accrued,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. That's a good way to put it.
every single thing that you do is just compounding interest on that bulk that you invested in the beginning. And so it's like you can't think like I'm going to put in $1,000 every single time. It's like no, you're literally putting in like 1 cent, 10
Yeah.
cents,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
very minuscule amounts, but that compounding interest builds up to the point where you can withdraw a book, even though
Yeah. Yeah.
that's like it's a very, yeah, I mean it's like I hope the metaphor works, but it's like you have
I
to
like it because sometimes
understand.
you don't even have 2 cents in a day.
Yeah, yeah,
It
you
makes
got
total
like
sense.
0.005
Yeah.
cents that you invested in this thing, but you have to think about it that every single amount of currency that you put into it is still moving you forward. And even
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
you're disappointed in yourself, try not to let that disappointment carry over to the next day.
Yeah, because then you will be negative eventually. Yeah. Yep. No, I totally agree with that. Yeah, I think that makes total sense. And I think a lot of people too. It's like funny because I'm here like somebody the other day. I'm like I don't know. I'm like 10 episodes ahead right now, so I'm trying to remember who I interviewed. But oh, I'm totally blank right now. Abby, I'm totally blank on her last name. But we were discussing that, right? Where she goes, "Oh, I have my audiobook, working on book 3." And then the previous author, one of the male authors I interviewed too last week, said the same thing, but they had like 3 products. And I'm like, isn't that crazy? The indie community that like having a book done, another book like almost done, and then an audio book coming out that like we consider that like not having anything. You know what I mean? Like I'm like, what do you guys think? Like I'm like, that's a lot of stuff. Like Mushroom Blues alone is a huge product for you. You know what I mean? Like that's a huge accomplishment. But I feel like it's like kids, right? Or getting married. Like, you know, you're like, you graduate high school. What college are you going to? And then when are you graduating? What job are you getting? Oh, are you guys getting married? And then, oh, when are you having your kid? Then after that, it's like third kid, fourth kid, when's your funeral? You know, it's like
Yeah.
those are the only benchmark. You know what I mean? But like those are the only benchmarks for adulthood. Like, oh, you changed jobs. Did you get, are you the boss? Or, you know, but it's like authors are the same way. I think indie authors, I just want to point out recently, I've been pointing out to people, I'm like, guys, I'm like, we do a lot of crap, you know, for
Mhm.
one product, you know? And I just think like people got to give themselves credit. So when, you know, before we started recording, when you were telling me you're working on top of having the book out, I'm like, that's a lot of stuff, you know, and even in 1 year, even in 2 years for, you know, a lot of people. So I don't know.
Mhm.
I think it's kind of crazy, but like you mentioned, I think it's perfect for mentioning savings because I can't remember if it was us or if it was one of the podcasters that I was listening to you guys interview before that, like episode 89 or maybe whatever it was before us. But it was like somebody had mentioned that, you know, that like you really got to like save up that feeling of publishing, right? Like writing, finishing, completing, and releasing Mushroom
Mhm.
Blues. And that needs to kind of be like your savings account, you know, especially on the next book if you're having difficulty or, you know, if it takes you longer than you think because
Yep.
of, you know, just stuff, you know, like you mentioned, those stressful things that they pop up. But I just think like whoever said it had just such a good point that you really need to really take those and kind of put it in like an emotional savings account, right? Like I
Yeah.
think sometimes for us it's hard, right? Like you get the book done, edited, cover, release, and then it's the same thing, right? People are like, what are they going to ask you? When's your next book coming out?
Exactly.
Or when's the
Yeah, because
audiobook?
it's like
But it's like,
you have to set your own goalposts and
yeah, 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 yeah.
not not let them go by the wayside when you achieve it. It's like doing these things is one of my friends, Peter Hartog, another indie author. He said that just finishing a book, not even a published book, but a first draft, you've already accomplished more than billions of other people will ever accomplish in their entire lives. And millions of people around the world strive to reach that point. They say, "Oh, I would write a book if dot dot dot.
Mm-hmm.
I would write a book if I had the time. I would write a book if I had another career path. I would write a book blah blah blah." So many people aspire to do this thing, but most of them don't realize the true weight of that commitment. And
Yeah,
so the
yeah, yeah.
fact that you finish a first draft is still huge. Don't let that feeling go away. Don't waste the emotional and the emotional achievement or the pride that you feel doing that thing, and just hold on to it, put it in your savings account, and allow that to fuel the things that come up in the future as you move towards publication and all these different
Yeah,
stages. As you said, moving into the next book and making sure that your savings account isn't zero by the time you go into the next project.
yeah. No, totally. I just always find it funny because someone asked me privately, they're like, I got my first book up there, and what happens if it doesn't sell? And I'm like, write another one. I'm like, redo your sales tag. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I'm an ex football player. Like we won state championships all the time. Like I don't know. I was raised by my parents differently too. Like I'm like I just don't quit. I told people I'm like I don't care. Like well, what if this
Mm-hmm.
doesn't? I'm like I don't care. I'm like
Yeah.
I will readjust. You know what I mean? I'm like I did something that most people never do, like you said, and then you know, and then I'm like on 3 or 4 right now. You know, maybe they haven't been published. I got 6 more in the bank if I just finish them up. You know, those drafts are done. You know, it's to 12. I think Brandon Sanderson. People forget, right? He wrote 13 books
13
before he
books.
ever had one sold. Yeah, you know, and it's like, you know, and I don't know. I just think that again, like you were saying, that emotional currency, I'm going to steal that because I'm going to call it that. I'll give you credit, but like that emotional currency really needs to keep you going because chances are, right? Like you, and I think a lot of people forget what you were mentioning earlier, and we've talked about, but haven't really spotlighted. But that, you know, that work being any author, let alone an indie author. I mean, your work's just beginning, right? And
Yeah.
this is part of your work, right? With being on all these, tours and podcast reviews and things. I mean, you set yourself up really well. But that's a ton of work, just in itself, leading away from your guys' podcast, your own writing, but it's something that you have to do, right? If you want to get the book out there. And, and I think a lot of people forget that, and like there's so many things you can do, but I just find it a shame when somebody loses that emotional currency, and I
Yeah.
keep trying to tell people, like, don't lose that, like store that, that's your nest egg, and then start building, the next one up. And whenever that something happens there, look back to that original nest egg and think,
Right.
man, I did something really cool. So I think
Yeah,
that's a
because
great
like
point.
the ability to pivot is super important, not just in life, but in self-publishing. I think you have a lot more flexibility to do that.
Yeah.
And many of the authors that I know or have met and seen who have had the most success are the ones who are able to pivot the most effectively. And that could be like Andy was talking to us about, the ability to realize my cover isn't working
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
as like a first impression for my book. And you need to be able to understand that and analyze the effect that a cover can have on a book, and think about ways to readjust and maybe find a new cover and upload a new one. Like my friend Alexander Darwin went through multiple covers before
Yep.
he got to the Felix Ortiz covers that he used for his trilogy of the Combat Codes saga. And he self-published that whole trilogy, and then he got picked up by Orbit and is now traditionally publishing that trilogy with new covers that Orbit's design department has deemed like this is the right way to market this based on like traditional marketing trends and whatnot. But
Yeah.
you need to be able to adjust, whether it's finding a new cover, um, just writing the next book, deciding what is a good point to end a series, what is a good point to introduce a new series, all these different factors. If you can pivot and you can do it effectively, especially in self-pub, then
Yeah.
I think you're setting yourself up in the long term for the most success.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think of like GM White, who I had on here recently, within the last season. Like we talked, and at one point, like I can't remember if he was on the show or I think he just put his stuff up, for Wizards, Warriors, and Words. So like Jed Hearn, Rob J. Hayes, Derek Ashton, Mike Collar Fletcher, and they actually helped him with his blurb. Um, and then I think he redid his covers, which look amazing. And I like the original ones, but these ones are just like astounding, from a design aspect. I was like, I love them. And then, but like changed his blurb, and that those two things made all the difference for him.
Yeah.
I started seeing a resurgence of the first book, and then I think he had book 2 out, or the novella, and changed both, and all of a sudden, that was just monumental, in terms of the success. But like you were saying, like I think like Travis Baldry too, like that's another one, where he wrote Legends and Lattes with like 3.5 months, and just thought, oh, I'm just gonna do this, and had some luck with the Barnes and Noble crew who were selling his book
Yeah.
and stuff in different independent bookstores. But still, like, talk about skill there, in terms of pivoting. I mean, he was like, oh, this is something that's happening and I'm going to pivot. And, then, he's picked up as well, traditionally published. So I just think that that's, when you're talking about pivoting, I think that you definitely need to think about that. And if you see, I think sometimes people think, oh, I don't want it to be this way. I had this set thought. And it's like, I don't think you can do that as an indie author. I
You
really
need to
think
have
you
that
have to.
flexibility.
Yeah, you have to be flexible, because you don't know, particularly you and I, right? We don't know where our audiences are yet, and we're trying, but we might discover like a whole new audience, and I know people too that have flipped genres. If you look at Lindsay Broker's podcast, with her, Joe Lalo, and them, like they have had so many people on within the last 13 years of the podcast, however long it ran for, 12, 13 years. But they had so many people that were like, oh, I wanted to be urban fantasy, but then I wrote epic fantasy, and that's where I struck it. And that's where,
Yeah.
my voice worked better. So talk about pivoting. I mean, you look at people that, have done it well and done it right, I would say. And the thing that they did right, in my opinion, isn't all these things we talked about. It's really just their ability to pivot, and find the audience that, will really appreciate them, their writing, and their books. So I think that makes total sense.
Agreed.
Wow, man, talk about a masterclass. Apparently you learned a lot from Andy. So,
no, I learned a lot. I learned a lot from 2.5 years of podcasting.
So that's actually, I totally forgot about that. I meant to ask you, as like a sub question earlier, and we just were saying good things, and I was listening to what you're saying, and I forgot. But I just want your opinion. Like, what has podcasting done for you as an author? Because I know it's done a lot for me, but what has podcasting for you? Like, how has it helped you as an author?
Just immensely. Like, I mean, first of all, I started SFF Addicts as an experiment, more or less, to just bring on people whose work I admired and pick their brains about writing craft and genre and all these different things. So I've said it before, but this was a very selfish project for me. But what ended up happening is SFF Addicts grew to the point where the authors that we were inviting on are people I'd never thought we could have gotten on. Period. Oh, yeah. Like, last year alone was just wild in terms of,
you guys had some crazy guests
like Martha Wells and Christopher Paolini. Yep. and Jim Butcher, and these people who I really respect. But the thing is that even if it's like the New York Times bestsellers, or it's the debut authors,
yep,
or the indie authors, or what have you, everybody has incredibly valuable advice to impart. And so I've just been absorbing all of that for like the last 2.5 years. And at the same time, the podcast has allowed me to make connections with people that have become so integral to just like my everyday life. Yeah. MJ, who's my co-host now, just met her on the podcast, and 3 months later she became the co-host, and now we're super good friends. We've only known each other since, I guess it was like October 2022. Okay. Which isn't a very long time, but people who listen to the podcast say like, you guys have a really good rapport. And I think like our connection is very strong. And on top of that, it's like I have so many author friends that I know from around the world who I know I can reach out to, and they will be willing to help out in different capacities. And for me, that's incredible. It's like, not only was this little like selfish side project, not only has it developed into a show that helps other authors in terms of the advice and the the master classes and the interviews that they can listen to, but also the ways in which I'm learning and absorbing things as I record and editing, and at the same time, the community that I've been able to build around me, whether it's the friends or the acquaintances or the people in the blogging sphere or the podcasting sphere or the writing sphere, how all of these different spheres coalesce, and all of it has given me the confidence to know that my decision to be a writer is true and genuine to me, and here are all these people who are setting examples for where I want to be at some point in my life. And on top of that, the basis for me to be able to contact the right people to pursue a successful self-published career, in the sense that I was convinced over the course of 2.5 years that I don't want to go into trad. I wanted to at the beginning, but after hearing all the stories from different authors, I thought, this doesn't suit me,
Yeah.
In my entire adulthood, it's like I've been self-employed as like a music journalist, as a tattoo artist, as a graphic designer and illustrator, and all these different things. And working for other people has just never been my thing. And everyone is different, but it's about coming to that realization and that acceptance about what works best for you. And doing SFF Addicts taught me that trad is not for me. And I'm very happy that I made that decision, because I could then pivot into self-publishing, and at the same time know, based on people that I've had on the podcast and people that they know or have worked with, I can find a good cover artist. I can find a good editor. I can reliably ask certain people to be beta readers. All these different aspects that before I had neither the contacts nor the confidence to approach anybody about that. And so the podcast just laid the groundwork
Yeah,
for
yeah.
everything. And it wouldn't have been possible in the way that I'm doing it right now were it not for the podcast.
No, I totally agree, and it's funny because like Herman Stewart Angle, great author. So he started the greatest podcast in the multiverse, which I love. People should definitely check it out. Highly recommend it. I'll share stuff all the time. He actually just had ZS Diamante on
Nice.
for this current episode. Yeah, whenever this week is recording. So yes, that was really cool. But for me and you, it's kind of interesting because so he's an author and then started podcasting, which there's nothing wrong with that. And I love finding people that do the same thing that we do. But it's kind of interesting, I think, from my perspective, because you and I are doing the same thing and starting from the same point. And like I said, like Herman is coming from kind of like the other aspect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
to me, it's kind of interesting to see where you and I will go and then kind of meet in the middle with him. And I don't know, in terms of podcasting and, in terms of books. But it's kind of cool, you know what I mean? Like just to know people that are doing the same thing. Cause like for me,
Yeah.
like I was writing for a long time, but like you, but it was like, I don't know. I was using this as a way to keep going on the ladder as like motivation, like trying to siphon off other people's positive energy,
Yeah.
just to like keep going.
Like a little
Um,
vampire.
exactly. Yeah. Like a book vampire, a book career vampire.
Yeah.
But yeah, my friend said a while back, he goes, remember when you like why you started this? I was like, well, yeah, I was like, I wanted to learn this and that. He goes, yeah, he goes, but I didn't want to insert myself like some people, right? They're like, I want this, I want that. And I'm just like, that just isn't how I feel like the indie community in particular, works. And I was talking to people for a long time and I was like, I want to provide a service, like I want to provide something, that will help people. And then along the way, my buddy's like, one of them was like, well, you're having trouble with this. I goes, why don't you just do a Kickstarter? He goes, I bet you, he goes, how much do you need? Like $1,000? He goes, people would definitely, he goes, the authors you've helped, he goes, if each one does like $1 or $2, he's like, you'll reach a Felix Ortiz cover on Kickstarter like that,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm
Yeah.
like, I'll get there eventually. But I was like, oh, I never thought to even use this platform to help myself, if that makes sense. He goes,
Yeah. I
well,
mean,
you know what I mean? Like, it's just like, you
yeah.
just meet so many cool people and I could get bogged down sometimes, just like, at least I have, just being like, I'm just trying to help everybody. And I was like, oh, I guess I could say something about my book or this, but it never occurred to me, because the community's just been so cool. Like you said, that now people are asking me, like I had an author I've had on who I think's a bigger author for anybody. And they're like, hey, can I like get it? Can I like get an arc of your book and I'd love to review it? And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
it blew me away. I'm like,
Yeah.
why is this person asking me? You know what I mean?
No,
Like,
but
I
that's the
was like,
thing,
that's pretty cool.
that's just a reflection of this community, in the sense that
Yep. Agreed.
everybody is, it's like a symbiotic relationship of
It really is. Yeah.
mutual give and take,
Yep.
where everybody is giving so much, and for the most part they're taking what they need in order to sustain themselves and their work and whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's this very beautiful self-sustaining relationship within the community.
Yep.
And everyone who's a writer is super nerdy and loves this stuff. And so when they find out that so and so is writing a book, they're like, oh shit, what are you writing? What are you working on? And so it kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
ignites this spark of interest, and that transcends, popularity and sales. It
Yep.
transcends trad versus indie.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
of it is just, at the end of the day, we're all authors and we all really love what we're doing.
Yep.
And if we can help somebody else out, then we'll try our best to do that, And
Yeah.
MJ and I started a Patreon when she became a host, and that paid for my Felix Ortiz cover,
Mm.
So you can find ways to navigate this space. Even if you're an indie author and you know that the biggest hurdle is money, you can still navigate that space with help from the community, help from friends. Like your friend was saying, like Kickstarter, $1,000, it's possible, you know?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yep.
Nobody can ever say that it's not possible. So
Yeah, yeah.
if you feel like you can approach it from the right way and you know people that might be able to help you, then you can take that chance, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's cool too with Kickstarter. I don't know. I like the Kickstarter in the indie community because I know people that are like, oh yeah, I really want to have this editor or this title, and I've gotten quite a few, that I'm like, yeah, that I like this person. I'm like, I like their writing. I'm like, the product looks cool. So, I'm like, yeah, I'll give you $20, I'll
Mm-hmm.
share it everywhere, and I don't know. That's like sometimes my wife, she's like, do you want to sell books or do you just want to be part of the community and just have a book? I was like, at
they're
this
they're
point, I was
they're
like,
they're mutually exclusive. It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
you
Yep, yep,
cannot you cannot I don't think you can separate one from the other without the detriment of being more isolated in an already isolated
yep.
career path.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's like if you don't have
Totally.
the community, I think you're robbing yourself of the magic of these relationships, the
Yep.
support that authors give to one another.
Yeah, yeah.
If you ignore the community, and it's not just to say like the community only exists on Twitter or the community only exists here, blah blah blah.
Yeah, yeah.
There are various ways to navigate this community from the reader side or from the author side or what have you. If you just ignore it completely, then you're robbing yourself of the one thing that I think will get you through the most difficult aspects of being a writer.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. They're like people, message me all the time, email me. Like I said, I just had somebody earlier. I just made a comment somewhere. They're like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm just having an editing trip," and
Yeah,
they're just like, give me support, and like
yeah.
everybody understands, these different things. So, yeah, but I think it just makes it that much more fun because, like you said, you're just by yourself for so much. Like even when you or somebody else, or Herman, or asked me about a podcast or a question, or Andy's asked me about a book or something on Instagram, it's like it just makes me feel like I'm not alone, if that makes
Hmm.
sense. And it just makes it so much more enjoyable. I always tell people, I'm like, if you feel like you're an author or a writer or any creator and you feel like you're just out there by yourself, I'm like, just go engage, go engage in someone's posts, like even just telling somebody happy birthday or anytime somebody releases a book, I'm like, congrats, like that's
Happy
awesome,
book birthday, you know.
yeah, exactly. Like, and to me, I like that more than my actual birthday, if that makes sense. Like, I've had plenty of those, not very many book birthdays. So I'm
Yeah,
actually looking forward to that more. But yeah, yeah, I like the community way too much to ever give it up. So I think that makes
yeah.
sense. And then we're kind of wrapping up here on time, but I want to make sure that we have enough time for these last two. So I'm really interested in what's one thing you are looking forward to in terms of either writing or in terms of like your next several books in this universe. Like, is it something you're looking forward to writing, a particular character or storyline you have in mind, or is it just to kind of like have the four done and kind of see where they go from there? I'm just curious at what are you most excited about at the start here in terms of this universe you've created?
I mean, for me, it's mostly just it's the idea of building out this interconnected universe.
Mm,
Not only is it the
that's
Hoffman
cool.
Report and 4 books, but the next book I write is the beginning of a trilogy, which is
Mm.
set in the same world but 30 years later and incorporating more
Oh, cool.
cyberpunk and biotech and corporate
Oh, cool.
espionage and all these different kinds of
Yeah.
things. And then on top of that, there are a couple of short story collections that I have in mind. There's
Oh, sweet.
um, a standalone that I want to write based on the Spore War, which is something that is mentioned in
Oh,
Mushroom
that's
Blues.
cool. Yeah.
There's a duology that I want to write, which is I basically boil it down to like fungal samurai and like an Akira Kurosawa
Yeah.
inspired kind of setting where it's going back hundreds of years in the same world,
Oh,
but
that's so cool.
more fantasy and very, very rich with fungi and how that almost kind of transcends into magical territory. And so I'm just really excited to bounce back and forth between different series and kind of see how
Yeah.
they interact with one another, but then also how readers start to interact with the different characters and how they appear in one series and how they come back in a different series but older or what have you, and all the different like cameos and inside jokes and stuff like that. So for me it's just really exciting to be able to play around with a shared universe from that
Yeah, yeah.
perspective, not only so I don't burn myself out on writing one particular series from start to finish, but also that I get to be a bit more playful in how each individual book interacts with the other ones.
Yeah, you like to be able to play in that sandbox, right? You spent so much time and energy. I remember my dad and I did that for my brother, built like a sandbox. And then we were so tired we didn't even play in it.
Yeah,
It was just like, it was like one of those things. And I'm like, man, and I feel like that's sometimes how authors are, right? Is you're just spend so much time, you just go to that next thing. And sometimes it's nice just
exactly.
to play in that sandbox you created. So that's super cool.
Uh-huh.
Uh, that's just awesome. I'm looking forward to. I was going to ask you that earlier, and then I got sidetracked. But I was like, going to ask you if we were going to get some of that prehistory of the Hoffman Report, on this planet. And I just thought, yeah, it'd be really cool. So you mentioned samurai, so and fungal people and culture and things. So sold one there. So at least you already sold one, right? Which kind of
Hell yeah, man.
puts you in the black, at least someone. So that's
That's
really
all I need.
cool.
All I need is one
Yeah.
sale. That's it.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's what I said years ago. I was like, I just want to help one student. Then I helped one tremendously in the first year, and I was like, maybe 10, or something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that, and just kept kind of moving those goalposts like we talked about before. But all
exactly.
right, well, that's super cool. So could you just tell us once more, when Mushroom Blues is going to be released, and maybe any other projects, things like that? I know you mentioned quite a few, but maybe what you're kind of thinking next in terms of what's the next thing after Mushroom, Blues comes out.
Sure thing. So Mushroom Blues is out on March 19th. That'll be paperback, hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. That same day as well, the official Mushroom Blues soundtrack will be released. So
Oh, that's cool.
you can pick that up. It's 8 original songs, 45 minutes of just like beautiful ambient soundscapes, produced, mastered by Sporer. That will be available digitally. You can stream it on Spotify. And then they're going to do like a limited run of cassette tapes. I think they're going to put it at
Oh, that's
50.
cool.
So cassette tapes actually appear in Mushroom Blues. So it's a bit of like a meta thing that we both
Oh, that's
decided
really
on.
cool.
So yeah, you can try and get in on that at the beginning. You can also find me on SFF Addicts, where MJ Kuhn and I release new episodes every Tuesday. I think, yeah, like we had some amazing guests in February, Robert
Oh
Jackson
yeah.
Bennett, Primi Mohammed. March, we got some really fun stuff lined up as well. MJ's going to be interviewing me,
Oh,
which is going
sweet.
to be a good time. And then in terms of the Mushroom Blues book tour, you can go read chapter 1. Chapter 2 will be out on March 1st, which I believe this episode will be releasing after. So you can go read that. So get a taste of the book. You can go read chapter 1 and 2 for free on Before We Go blog and Fan-Fi Addict, to give you a sense of whether or not this book is for you. Yeah, and next book, hoping to release it later this fall, but it's the one that I scrapped and then I'm reworking, and that'll be Spore City, which is the beginning of the Kanoko trilogy, very much rooted in cyberpunk, but more like fungal punk with lots of fungal biotech, big corporations and corporate espionage, murder mystery at its core, but
Oh,
also
awesome.
mushroom headed gangsters and sort of like crime families, very much akin to The Godfather and Fond du Lee's The Greenbone Saga. So
Oh, awesome.
hopefully that's coming up in the fall. But yeah, just a lot of fun stuff to look forward to. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can
yeah.
also
That's all
follow
awesome.
me on any social media at Adrian M. Gibson. I'm pretty much everywhere. You can hit up my website, adrianmgibson.com. I got an online store there if you want to get some Mushroom Blues merch, but also some merch that is not related to the book. And all of that was designed by me. And there's a lot
Oh,
of
awesome.
options for shipping to various parts of the world. So go check that out.
That's awesome. I just want to remind our audience that in the description, anywhere where you're watching or listening to this podcast, Adrian's links will be in there. We'll also put Sci-Fi Addict in there as well, and then their podcast, SFF Addicts. You guys definitely need to check those out for sure. Talk about a community and support and just great people, great, amazing interviews. I think some people forget sometimes that I'm a reader first, so I
Yeah.
absolutely love listening to your guys' podcasts. Nicholas Ames was just such a good one. I know it was like one of your like the first one or whatever, but I went over it a couple times because I'm about to start Kings of the Wild, which I'm really excited about
Nice.
for TBR this year.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like I was thinking of something like Andy reminded me earlier with one of his Instagram posts. He's like, and JD Russell too. They're like, what are some that you haven't read that you should have read by now? And that was one of them that I was putting on my list. So
I think you're
but
really
yeah,
gonna
just
love that
great
book. It's so
interviews.
good, man.
Yeah. I'm really excited for that one. But check out Adrian and MJ, and then Sci-Fi Addict. I'll have all those links in there. You can find all of Adrian's social links in there as well. So yeah, please go take a look. Make sure you check out chapter 1 at least of Mushroom Blues. You will not be disappointed. Adrian, thank you so much for coming on. It's always good to talk, my friend. I look forward to at least having you on in the fall, if not, talking about something sooner, or just chit-chatting on social media or something like that. But if there's anything I can do, send it to me. Throw the calendar. I want to mention to our guest too, Adrian's got some of the best book reviewers, podcasters that he's going to be on. So I'll be blasting his book tour everywhere, because those are about to be some amazing episodes. So I really look forward to listening and sharing those. But if there's anything else I can do in the meantime, to help you with the release before, during, or after, just let me know and we'll get it out there, my friend.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on, buddy.
Yeah, of course, anytime. Like I said, good luck, and I hope you guys have a good rest of the day, and I will talk to you later on social media, my friend.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.
See you later.